Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Megillah. We are up to Perek Daled Mishnah Yud. Today's Mishnah should be Leirun Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev Neriyahu ben Burcha Israelov Menuchatam Began Eden Amen. And Leavdi ben Chaim Lechaim v'Refuah Shenemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa Betoch Shach Cholei Israel. We learned above in chapter 4, Mishnah 4, that it was customary to have someone translate the public Torah reading into Aramaic so that the people would understand it. Our Mishnah teaches that certain passages should not be translated because their content is inappropriate for the general public. For the same reason, certain passages from the prophets should not be read as the Haftarah. In the times of the Mishnah, the weekly Haftarot were not set. Rather, each congregation could select the passage to read as the Haftarah. Therefore, the Mishnah says certain passages from the prophets should not be read as the Haftarah. The Mishnah begins, Maaseh Reuven nikra velo mitargem. The story of Reuven, when it says in Sefer Bereshit, chapter 35, verse 22, that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, is read but not translated so as not to shame Reuven. The Gemara says that it is a mistake to think that Reuven sinned. What really happened was that after Rachel died, Yaakov Avinu moved his bed from her tent to the tent of Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant. Reuven felt that this was an insult to his mother Leah, and so he moved the bed into Leah's tent. As the Gemara on page 55b explains, along with Rashi in Sefer Bereshit, chapter 35, verse 22. Maaseh Tamar nikra u'mtargem. The story of Tamar, in which Tamar was violated by Amnon in the book of Shmuel, book 2, chapter 13, verses 2 through 22, may be read as Haftarah and even translated. However, the verses that refer to Amnon and the son of David may not be read, as we will see below. Maaseh Egel Harishon nikra u'mtargem. The first telling of the story of the golden calf is read and translated. Although this story reflects badly on the Jewish people, reading it in public benefits them because the embarrassment caused by the reading helps to atone for their sin, as the Gemara explains in Masechet Megillah, page 25b. V'hasheni nikra v'lo mitargem. But the second telling of the story, so the first telling of the story is in Shemot, chapter 32, verses 1 through 20. The second telling of the story is verses 21 through 25 and 35 in chapter 32 in Shemot. That is read and not translated. Since the second telling describes Aaron as being responsible for the golden calf, we do not translate it out of respect for him. Bekat Kohanim, similar to the priestly blessing, is read and not translated because it contains the words, "May God show you his countenance," which might be understood by some people as meaning that God favors the Jewish people even though they do not deserve it. These people would fail to realize that the Jewish people do in fact deserve God's favor. Rashi cites Brachot in page 20b, which relates that God said to the angels, "Do the Jewish people not deserve the favor I showed them? I said in Dvarim," Hashem says in chapter 8, verse 10, "and you shall eat and be satisfied and blessed," which means that they are obligated to recite Birkat Mazon only after a meal that leaves them satisfied. But they accepted upon themselves, Hashem says, to recite the blessing even after eating a piece of bread that is merely the size of an olive or an egg, kazayt or kibitzah. Maaseh David v'Amnon lo nikrain v'lo mitargemin. The verses in the story of David and Amnon that refer to Amnon as the son of David are not read or translated. Although this story referred to earlier as the story of Tamar may be read and translated, as the Mishnah said earlier, these particular verses in the book of Shmuel 2, chapter 13, verse 1 and chapter 13, verse 4, they must be omitted out of respect for David. Even the verses in the Torah that may not be translated must be read because we are obligated to read the entire Torah in the synagogue. The books of the prophets, however, do not need to be read in public in their entirety. Therefore, problematic section from the prophets should not even be read. And Maftirin b'Merkava, we may not read the account of the chariot in Sefer Yechezkel, chapter 1 as Haftarah, because upon hearing its mystical description of heaven, people might ask questions about it and seek to examine its secrets, which is inappropriate for all but the greatest scholars. The vision of heaven experienced by the prophet Yechezkel is called Maaseh Merkava, the account of the chariot, because it describes angelic beings bearing the throne of God like horses drawing a chariot. The wisdom contained in this passage is of such a secret nature that it may not be taught to anyone explicitly. Rather, a teacher may give only its broad outline to a scholar who is perceptive enough to infer the details on his own, as we will see Bli Neder in Chagigah, chapter 2, Mishnah 1. The Rabbi Yehuda matir, but Rabbi Yehuda permits it as reading it as Haftarah, because people who cannot understand it will not try to delve into its meaning. If the listener is a scholar, he will realize that the meaning of these verses is beyond his understanding. And if he is not a scholar, he will not ask anyone about it because he presumably knows that he is unworthy of being answered. And the Rav does tell us that Halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. We read the account of the chariot as the Haftarah as well. And the notes in the article listed add that we read it on Shavuot. Rabbi Eliezer says, we may not read Yechezkel chapter 16, which begins, make known to Yerushalayim all of our abominations as Haftarah, because it speaks of the degradation of Yerushalayim. And the Rav does tell us, Rabbi Eliezer, the Halacha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. And that is in Rabotai of Mishnot Masechet Megillah, Mazal Tov, Hadrach Halan, Vadran Alach, Masechet Megillah. We begin now, Bezrat Hashem Bli Neder, with Mishnayot Moed, Katan. The holy days of the year are of two types, Shabbat and Yom Kippur, during which all melacha, all labor is forbidden. And Yom Tov, Pesach, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, and Sukkot, during which many activities needed for the preparation of food are permitted even though they involve melacha. So we have Shabbat and Yom Kippur, which all labor is forbidden, and Yom Tov, which is Pesach, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, and Sukkot, which many activities needed for the preparation of food are permitted even though they involve melacha. However, the festivals of Pesach and Sukkot are themselves divided into two distinct periods of holiness. The first and last day of each festival, which have the sanctity of Yom Tov, in which melacha is prohibited except for what is used for food preparation, and the days in between, 5 in the case of Pesach, 6 for Sukkot, during which most melachot are permitted. Again, in Eretz Yisrael, where the first and 7 days of Pesach and the first and 8 days of Sukkot are Yom Tov, Chol HaMoed lasts from the 2nd to the 6 days of Pesach and from the 2nd to the 7 days of Sukkot. Outside of Eretz Yisrael, where each Yom Tov is celebrated for an extra day, Chol HaMoed does not begin until the 3rd day for these festivals. These intermediate days are known as Chol HaMoed, literally the mundane period of the festival, and it is these days and their laws that form the subject of Mishnayot Masechet Moed Katan, which literally means minor festival. Let us begin with Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph. Although melacha is generally prohibited on Chol HaMoed, one may do melacha to prevent loss or damage, what we call davar ha'aved. Just to explain a little more, contrary to popular impression, Chol HaMoed is a holy day. It's not as holy as the first and last days of Yom Tov, and many activities are prohibited in it. Some are prohibited for reasons of melacha, some because they involve unnecessary or excessive exertion, and some because permitting them would cause Chol HaMoed to lose its sense of holiness and make it seem as an ordinary weekday. So that's what the Mishnah really is going to be discussing. So again, we said, although melacha is generally prohibited on Chol HaMoed, one may do melacha to prevent loss or damage, what we call davar ha'aved. However, this is permitted only when one does not expend excessive effort, tircha yetera. If a melacha entails great effort, it is prohibited even for the sake of averting a loss. This Mishnah discusses how these rules affect the melacha of watering a field on Chol HaMoed. Watering a field is forbidden under the melacha of planting zoreah because it helps plants to grow. It also mentions the Shemitah year when certain field-related work is also forbidden. Every 7th year Shemitah, it is forbidden to do most type of agricultural work, including plowing and planting in Eretz Yisrael. The Mishnah begins, Mashkin bet shlachin b'moed b'shviit. We may water a field that requires constant irrigation. Literally, bet shlachin would be tired or thirsty field, meaning that it cannot survive on rainwater alone. It must be constantly watered by other means or the crops will be permanently damaged. So we may water a field that requires this kind of constant irrigation on Chol HaMoed. Now, Chol HaMoed is referred to in the Mishnah simply as Moed, so it says here b'moed. And on Shemitah. Even though watering is usually forbidden on Chol HaMoed, a person is allowed to water a field that needs constant irrigation because if he does not do so, his crops will be damaged. And like we learned, one may do melacha on Chol HaMoed to prevent loss or damage. During Shemitah, however, a person may water even a field that does not require constant irrigation, but can usually survive on rainfall alone. Although watering such a field is needed only to make sure that it has enough water, that is a sufficient reason to permit watering it on Shemitah. The Mishnah specifies a field that requires constant irrigation because only in that case is watering permitted even on Chol HaMoed, as the Rav explains. Bet ben mimayan she'yatza batchila ben mimayan shelo yatza batchila. Furthermore, he may take water for this purpose either from a new spring which emerged recently or from an old spring which did not emerge recently. Although the sides of a new spring are weak, we may use its water. We are not concerned that they might collapse and that he will come to exert great effort in repairing them. Like we mentioned earlier, work requiring great effort is put on Chol HaMoed even to prevent a loss, but here we do not have that concern. Now the Mishnah cites cases in which watering such a field is forbidden in Chol Moed, even though it is needed to prevent the loss. Aval en mashkin, however, we may not water it, lo mimeg shamim, by diverting water from a pool of rainwater to one's field with his foot, even though that does not involve great effort, meaning one uses his foot to form a groove in the ground from the spring to the field, allowing the water to flow there on its own. That we cannot do. Below mimea kilon, or with water drawn from a well with a bucket, which does require great effort. Since taking water from a well is forbidden due to the effort, the sages also prohibited taking water from a pool of rainwater where little effort is involved, because if that were permitted, people might think that using a well is also permitted. Now, one more case in which melacha is forbidden in Chol Moed, even to prevent the loss. Then osin ugiot lekfanim, we may not make ditches around the roots of grapevines to collect rainwater, because that too requires great effort. The last two prohibitions, watering from collected rainwater or a well and digging ditches around vines, apply only on Chol Moed and not on Shemitah. During Shemitah, there is no restriction on exerting great effort. And that is the end of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.